Okay, welcome everyone. I am Jocelyn Alcott. I am a professor of history and international comparative studies, and I currently serve as the director of the program in gender, sexuality, and feminist studies here at Duke University. I am, for those of you who can't see me right now, I am a white woman. I am standing in front of my fantasy location in Lake Como, but that is not where I am currently. I'm currently here joining you from the unceded tribal territories of several First Nations, in fact, including the Siouan-speaking Ino, Shakori, and Ashishir people who came to be affiliated with the Occaneechi and Saponi nations, as well as the Iroquois-speaking Tuscarora Nation. Lauren Henschel is going to include links in the chat box so that you can learn more about the histories, cultures, and current activities of all of these peoples. Also, please note that this event is equipped with closed captioning, but you'll need to turn that on from your individual computers. You should be able to do that from the by turning on the captions and the accessibility settings in your preferences. This event forms part of an ongoing international interdisciplinary collaboration, Revaluing Care in the Global Economy, which we launched a couple of years ago. The project started from a recognition that we've been talking about the maldistribution of care work for over a century. And for at least half a century, there's been a robust body of research and critical thinking across disciplines, including extensive data collection, various metrics and indices, and reams of essays decrying the fact that care work remains badly undervalued in all senses and falls overwhelmingly to women, particularly racially or ethnically marginalized women. And this is the case pretty much around the world, not only in the United States. The standard repertoire of solutions, state market and technology-based approaches have barely made a dent in the problem. And as we've seen in the United States, with failed efforts to pass the Build Back Better legislation, even these are a very heavy lift. We launched the current project in 2018 to see if we could find ways to open up this question of valuing care, to think about it from new perspectives. And we focus on three principal research areas. First, metrics, so how we measure care and how it affects care when we try to measure it. Second, governance, so how laws and policies both foster and reflect normative values of care. And third, social practices, so how various practices and social formations inform attention to care. We've also started from two fundamental premises that have become even more evident in the current moment. First, that social, cultural, and ecological care are all interdependent and imbricate. And second, that innovative solutions to the crisis of care can be found in many corners of the world, particularly those that have been most suspicious of the standard repertoire of solutions. Today's event, Fieldnotes to Survival, is the third in a series on visualizing care, a project that stems not only from a long-standing feminist effort to make visible the time, labor, attention, and expertise required for care, but also from a discomfort with our own efforts to represent care without reinscribing naturalized and commonsensical conceptions of what constitutes care and what care implies. Working with several members of our group here at Duke, we decided to turn to artists to help us defamiliarize our understanding of care and to help us develop new sensory and lexical vocabularies for representing care. Each event in this series, including today's, also includes an online exhibit selected from works that were submitted in response to a call for submissions. This exhibit, the current exhibit, is guest curated by the artist and curator Felicity Palma and can be accessed through the link that Lauren will provide in a chat. The exhibit will come down on January 25th, but we will have more events later this year, including on February 18th, another Visualizing Care panel, an exhibit on digital care, and on April 1st, an event on ecological care. If you are not already on our mailing list, please feel free to drop your email address in the chat and we will add you to it. The Revaluing Care in the Global Economy project has enjoyed broad support here at Duke, and we particularly want to thank the program in Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies, as well as the Mellon-funded Humanities Unbounded program, which has not only supported the Revaluing Care in the Global Economy lab, but also was quite open to allowing us to reorient the lab toward this Visualizing Care series. GSF and Humanities Unbounded are not, of course, simply offices, but rather people who do all the work that make these events possible. And I particularly want to thank Lauren Henschel, the artist Lauren Henschel, feminist theorist Tanya Rispoli, GSF program coordinator Julie Winmore, and providing support from the Humanities Unbounded lab, Laura Eastwood. Lauren Henschel is the intellectual author and principal organizer of today's event, which which draws partly on her own work about the ways that disability studies have offered particularly important insights regarding normative conceptions of care. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists today, two visiting artists and two wonderful colleagues here at Duke. In the interest of time, I'm going to be brief with my introductions here, but Lauren is going to provide links for all participants in the chat so you can learn more about their amazing work. I'll introduce each of the artists in turn. They will speak for about 10 minutes each, and then those two presentations will be followed by a discussion led by our colleagues. So first, Kim Mcdaniel is an experimental filmmaker, media collaborator, choreographer, and performer whose films have shown at Slamdance, Antimatter, Chicago Underground Film Festival, ADF's Movies by Movers, and whose exhibition venues include the Rochester Contemporary Art Center, Whitney Humanities Center at Yale University, and the London Beaux Arts Gallery, among others. Her practice is rooted in the interdisciplinary research and draws on her studies in psychology, choreography, and disability studies. She graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee with an MFA in film, video, animation, and new genre, and currently teaches as an assistant professor in cinema at Binghamton University. She is also a trained Alexander Technique teacher with an interest in hypermobility and trauma. So Kim, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jocelyn. And I just wanted to say thank you to Lauren and to Felicity for inviting me to be here. I'm so excited and very honored to be in a room with you all. So thank you. My name is Kim Mcdaniel and my pronouns are she, her. I am a white woman with highlighted blonde and brown hair, and I'm sitting in a room full of plants with bright windows behind me. I'm wearing a black turtleneck and a black sweater that has flowers over it. I am currently living in Ithaca, New York, which is Susquehannock, Cayuga, and Haudenosaunee territory. And I'm just gonna briefly kind of talk about my practice a little bit and show some slides. And we'll get started. I guess before I share my screen, I'll just kind of give a little bit of background about who I am and how I got here. I was a choreographer and a performer. I was studying dance. And in my early 20s, I got a head injury, which was kind of the last injury in a string of injuries and chronic pain that I had dealt with for most of my life. And the head injury was kind of the final straw in terms of my body being unable to rebound or recover fully from it. And even when my diagnostics had cleared up and the doctors said there's nothing on your MRI anymore, there's nothing that's showing up as to why you're still in pain, I was still dealing with debilitating chronic pain and fatigue that simply wasn't going away, whatever I did. And I decided that the medical model of health had basically failed me, and that I was tired of being told that there wasn't anything wrong with me when I couldn't work and couldn't do the things I had always thought of my body to be able to do, and decided to turn to filmmaking as a way of healing. And also as a way of practicing care, because I felt it was unsafe for me to dance. Well, I couldn't. I was basically in bed a lot at this point in my life. But with filmmaking, you can edit in bed and you can do a lot of things in bed. And so this was a medium that I felt like I could do safely. And that was also pretty similar to dancing. In terms of editing movement and thinking about choreography. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen now. This is a GIF that I made from one of my films, Exit Strategy 1, It's a looping video shot from above of a miniature life vest or life saver that's stuck in a stream of the bathroom sink faucet. And just as the lifesaver escapes the stream, it kind of falls back into the stream of water again, and the sink is nearly overflowing. I'm a self-taught filmmaker. I went and got my MFA in film, but had never really made films before that. And in the beginning, especially, I was using objects to help me tell my stories. So this was, finding this kind of like dollhouse miniature lifesaver was one way that I could use objects as a metaphor to communicate my story. Here's another example of a still from Exit Strategy 1. Again, using spoons as metaphor. This was inspired after I was introduced to Christine Miserandino's spoon theory of chronic illness, which is very a well-known essay in the disability field for explaining what it's like to live with a chronic illness. And the essay is available online. If you Google it, it's a great essay if you don't know it. I thought I would just share a little bit. As a self-taught filmmaker, I didn't really know rules, which kind of led me to a lot of really interesting ways of shooting things. So this is kind of two shots here of I started realizing the more and more I was filming that I loved shooting from above. And it was a very unconscious decision made at the time. I didn't know why I liked it so much until like fourth, fifth film in, I started realizing, wow, like all of these shots are from above, and like, what is that about? And I was doing a lot of kind of like crazy things to get there. So like here you can see, these are two images of that show. The first is a tripod taped to a closet door with the camera attached to it, pointing down at a table with a red cloth. And then the second image is of a camera attached to a tripod that is on top of a table, and that's pointed down, shooting a small cloth with a ring on it. And so I started realizing that there was this motif that kept appearing of pointing down. And I kind of connected that to my embodiment of disability and my head injury for many years. And it's still actually pretty hard for me to look up. So to extend my neck and like look at the ceiling, I spent 6-7 years actually avoiding that because it would trigger so much pain and nausea and all these other things. And so I realized that my habit to point the camera down was actually an embodiment of my lived experience looking down all the time. It also, it felt like the films that I was making, these stills are called exit strategies, which were originally created as like an exit out of pain. And I also realized it was an exit out of shame. So a lot of these films that I was making were about releasing embodied memories that I felt like were tied to being depressed and sick, but also about my history of being shamed for being depressed and sick. And so I felt like when I feel shame in my body, I feel it at the back of my neck. My neck gets really hot and it's really hard. It's kind of like when you picture a dog with its tail between its legs, like that shame, embodied shame feeling. I felt that in my body. Like I wanted to curl over and like not look up and not engage at all. And so the camera pointing down, I felt was also a translation of my shame and how I felt about being disabled and being in pain at that time in my life. How am I doing on time? I just want to make sure I don't take up time.
I think you're fine.
Okay. I just have 2 more slides here. So this is a photo, top down, again, a close-up perspective of a white person. It's me on a cream-colored bed sheet. And the hands and the feet meet one another in a very like obvious distortion. This is another still from exit strategy number 5. There were 6 films in the series that I made. This is kind of the second to last one. And yeah, I started realizing, in addition to kind of having the camera pointed down a lot, I was really also interested in a fragmented body on screen. And that was another attempt to communicate my own dissociation in my body and my own feeling of brokenness and disconnection. And I also have Ehlers-Danlos, which is a hypermobility disorder. I actually don't call it, I don't consider it a disorder, because I think it's actually like many in disability studies, it's opened up a door to be creative in ways that not having the disorder would not allow me to. So I don't actually think of it as a disorder, but it means that I have my connective tissue. I don't have a lot of collagen in my connective tissue, which makes doing these kind of really distorted, fragmented body shapes kind of easier. And so I felt like it was these types of images were showing who I was, and also at the same time acting as a metaphor for how I felt internally as well. This is a still, so this is an image of a beige ceiling tiles as in a doctor's office, and one of the ceiling tiles is cut out, and the cutout is an image of a bright blue sky with clouds, and the perspective of the photo is someone looking directly up at the ceiling. So this is a film that I'm currently working on, and to me, it's interesting. I started making my exit strategy series in 2016, and now, kind of 6 years later, I'm interested in the opposite perspective. So now, instead of having the cameras pointed down, I have images of the camera pointed bottom up and staring up. And so this is an image that might feel familiar to somebody who has spent time in doctors' offices. They often do this in physical therapists or doctors' offices. I think that they think it will make the experience more pleasant, but like, to me, it seems almost, it's like a false reality in some ways to me. It's trying to be beautiful when in fact it's not really true. So yeah, I think that when I first started making the films, I didn't really know about disability studies. I just had the embodied experience of what I had dealt with and have been dealing with since my injury and before that. And it was kind of throughout the process of making them that I became more and more aware that about my relationship to disability studies and justice, and feeling now quite protective of my disability identity, and that it is something to be honored, and that I don't need to heal myself in order to be okay. And exit strategies 1 through 4 are available through the online exhibition, and then a short clip of a new film I'm working on called A Story That Doesn't Have to Do with Me, which was like kind of an inside joke, because after making 6 films all about you, I was kind of like, okay, enough. I'm done. Like I feel like a narcissist. Like I'm, like, let me make a story that doesn't have to do with me. But of course, eventually it because I work in the personal, of course, it's always about me too. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim. That was wonderful. So next up, we have Charmaine Bee, who is a multidisciplinary artist who uses mediums such as video, movement, sculpture, writing, sound, and textile to make work about Gullah heritage and the histories and manifestations of African diaspora spiritually. They work with materials harvested in the Sea Islands of the United States during the era of slavery, such as rice and indigo. Charmaine also makes work about medical bias, as well as healing and wellness through plant medicine, exploring how these histories are activated through portals of geographic sites, time and spaces we can't see, but can feel. Before receiving her MFA, Charmaine formally studied herbalism and currently makes herbal medicine and teaches workshops on herbs for dreaming. Charmaine is a current resident on Movement Radio Athens, where they broadcast they broadcast the Dream Support Hotline, a radio show project that creates space for Black people to call a hotline number and leave a message with their dreams. And Charmaine then interprets their dreams and puts them alongside music in a radio show format. Charmaine is from the Sea Islands of South Carolina and resides currently in Bahia, Brazil. So I will turn it over to you, Charmaine. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for having me and for the invitation and for organizing this space. I feel very grateful to be here and to share some about my practice and what I'm working on right now. A descriptor of me: I am a dark-skinned Black person. I'm wearing 2 gold necklaces, one with a bumblebee pendant and one with a circle, a gold circle and a blue stone within the gold circle. I'm also wearing a green dress. I have on an orange, white, and pink head wrap, a septum nose ring, a hoop nose ring on my left side and a stud nose ring on my left side as well, and square shaped pink frame blue light glasses. I grew up in the Sea Islands of South Carolina, and I am currently residing in Salvador, Bahia, Brazil. And I'm gonna try my best with time. I have about, I think, 15 slides. I won't talk about each and every one of them. I may just leave them up and describe what the image is, and then we'll move on to the next slide. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Is my volume good? Do people? Okay, good. All right. And in addition to images, I'm going to share some sound. So okay, I like to start with this first image of, this is actually my hand, a dark-skinned Black person's hand at the foreground of the frame with a gold bangle on and a black sleeved shirt, reaching out towards a body of water. Above the body of water is an overcast sky. And I took this image when I first arrived in Brazil in January of 2020. And I like to start with this image, and I like to start with water because I currently live in a city that is a coastal city. I grew up in a city that is I grew up in a town that's a coastal town, Beaufort, South Carolina. And so much about my practice, whether it's exploring African diaspora spirituality, herbalism, the histories of people being moved across bodies of water, family histories and secrets, what's being passed down about wellness, what we believe to be passed down about sickness and family. The through line for it for me is water and Black people's relationships to bodies of water. So I like to start in that space. And I've been doing a lot of work about the dream world as it relates to water and what messages come through to us in our dreams that are related to what we're processing in our waking day-to-day moments in terms of, histories that we're processing through our bodies, moments, memories, sensory experiences, and familial ancestral lineage memories that we're processing through the dream space. And so I'm going to read a little bit of work. Writing is also a part of my practice, and a part of my dream practice is recording, in addition to supporting people and remembering their dreams through herbalism, recording some of the vivid dreams that I have. And so I'm going to share one of those dreams. I had this dream in the year, in the fall of 2019. And I was in Brooklyn, New York, when I had this dream. There was a little boy that was on a drive with his father in Cameroon. They were there for a weekend for an event. They drove through a town. The father got out of the car at a bar, and the little boy took the car off and left his father in that town. For years and years, the man walked around the town, making calls and looking for a way back home. Initially, his clothes were of great wealth, and people thought he was a rich man and rushed to help him. Over time, he became old, his clothing became worn, and he became the crazy man around town. People knew he had a backstory, but people were less eager to help him. The story of his son leaving him behind had become a myth, and over time, despite circling the town for years, on some level he forgot why he was making those calls and circling and walking around. Yet part of him knew that he wanted to make the call to the right place and go home. After 36 years or so, the son returned to Cameroon with his mother for a graduation, and the son went by the place to see his father and apologize for leaving him there. But by that time, the father had become so fully acclimated and had someone adopted a new son. And although he knew who his son and his wife were, deep down in his heart, he was happy to see them. He felt confusion. He didn't know if he wanted to leave. He felt like he had a big choice ahead of him. It didn't feel like the natural urge to drop everything and leave the place that he had so badly wanted to leave when he was desperately looking for his son and making calls to reunite with his family. He didn't know what to do. And this next dream I'm going to read, I had in 2018. I don't remember the season, and I was in Brooklyn. And it's a dream that I had with this person named Regine. The spirits were about 8 to 10 years old, and they were dressed in pink and white church dresses with ruffles and fluff. The room that we were in reminded me of the dance studios that I went to when I was little and had wooden floors and big windows with muted lighting coming in. The spirits in their dresses were in dark-skinned little Black girls' bodies and were twirling rosemary in their hands. They were dancing in the room and around me, and they were reminding me that the body does not represent what or who the spirit actually is or who we think it looks like. I looked down at my bare Black red feet. I don't like to wear socks inside. I looked to my left, and Regine was sitting at a round table with a blue floral tablecloth that looked like something my grandma would have in her kitchen. She had her cards out and her eyeliner was thick around her eyes, and I sat down in the wooden chair in the round back that was at the table. There were 3 cards facing upward on the table. These cards weren't familiar like the tarot I knew, but I did think of the woman who lived in the house with the blue shutters by the water under the overpass. Her cards were like playing cards, and I gave her tea with Earl Grey and rose petals in a plastic Ziploc bag. But I didn't recognize Regine's cards, and before even pulling another one, she handed me a gold anklet with blue jewel charms on them, and she instructed me to wear them on my right ankle. She said the charm would help me with seeing the ants and parts of myself I don't allow to be still. She spoke through her heavy eyeliner and told me that she was going to find me someone. Just then, the little girl spirit brushed past me and rubbed me with rosemary. I didn't like the sensation. She looked past me at a figure who was her mother, and she said to her, in reference to me and worried, "She won't know who I am." So these next images I shot in Beaufort, South Carolina on a plot of land that my grandmother once owned. And in the 90s, it was sold out of my family's possession to a neighboring family that lived a little bit up the road. And when I was actually born in New York and spent summers before I was raised in South Carolina, visiting my grandmother and spending time on this land when there was a house there. And my mother, like when she has diabetes and had glaucoma and had a lot of transitions with her vision, and she was losing the sight in one of her eyes. And so before my mother and I moved to South Carolina, I would spend not only summers with my grandmother on this land in South Carolina, but like a year or two of school when my mother needed help while she was processing her health. And so I went to this space in 2012 with my Uncle Charlie, who he might not be here with us, but with my Uncle Charlie, who helped me with shooting, but also he hadn't been to that land in about 10 years. And we just had conversation about just his experiences growing up there, his memories, why he had taken space from the land, like what it felt like to be there for the first time after 10 or 11 years. And a lot of the images with me, like looking up to the trees. My grandmother had this big pecan tree in front of her house. And so like, my cousins and I would play around it a lot, and there was like a driveway. And so like people would park around the pecan tree, and the pecans would like get on people's cars, and then we would collect them and like hand them out. And so there's like a lot of memories about the trees in that space. And so what I was doing in the land was a lot of inquiry work because after my grandmother passed away, I had all of these conversations with one of my aunt Alice, and she talked to me about how all of the placentas of my mother and her siblings were buried on this land. And when I was doing a lot of research about West African spiritual tradition, I learned a lot about how that's a common practice throughout the diaspora to bury placentas. And so a lot of what I'm doing in this land and in these images where my head is to the ground, and I'm listening, or I'm looking up at an oak tree and I'm listening, is like inquiring not only of my uncle who was there with me, but inquiring of the land that's holding these placentas that have these ancestral stories. So, and this image is of bottles hanging from twine from a tree. There's a honey jar, some tea mugs, a flower vase on the left side, and on the right side, there's a self-portrait, black and white images, and kind of flipped upside down. I recently went to South Carolina last year in February and returned to this land. So that's my ritual. Every time I'm in South Carolina, I go to my grandmother's plot to sit with the land, to meditate with the land, and to glean information around like these ancestral passages, who's moved across the space, and what stories are embedded in this moss, in the soil, in the swamp. That is there. I want to show a bit of this video. Am I doing okay on time? Because once I start
talking, you're fine.
Okay. All right. This video is about 4 minutes, and I want to show the whole thing. It's also up on the website, but I started thinking a lot about autoimmune disorders, not only because my mother and a lot of the people in my family have diabetes, but while I was in grad school, like I had a really hard time with health and stress and feeling supported. And I ended up being diagnosed with like hyperthyroid, like overactive thyroid. And it was impacting my sleep and a lot of things with my body. And I was thinking a lot about how, in researching, I started to research how particularly people of color in these institutional spaces start to become ill, and like and how racism, anti-Blackness, how those things impact well-being. And so I was thinking about that a lot and my family's relationship with diabetes while making this work.
The TSH eventually enters the systemic circulation, ultimately reaching the cells of thyroid gland.
The thyroid is a butterfly-shaped gland that sits on top of the trachea or windpipe. It's made up of the right thyroid lobe as well as the left thyroid lobe, and they're connected by the isthmus or the centerpiece. Occasionally, there's a finger of tissue called the pyramidal lobe that extends towards the head. The thyroid creates thyroid hormone, which helps regulate your metabolism.
On the Confederate black soldiers, this was during the Civil War when blacks were fighting for the Confederacy. And you know, they said that war was very terrible, brother against brother, father against son. And what I tell you this, when they first started the war, they took it lightly. The women's would come dressed up and having a picture and say they see the soldiers marching. But it got bad, you know, real bad, you know. They talk about as bad as infection on a wound and amputation and, you know, when Sherman went through there, they destroyed most of the South resources, rail station, and, you know, ammunition supply, you know. Maybe they confiscated the, you know, with a big house and, you know, the slaves were free, but now they need, what, you know, have a means, but I believe they had a means. Some were taught to be, you know, like for the wheels, blacksmith, mason, you know, all that, you know. See when they had that opportunity, we could have rebuilt the South, but they don't want to admit it. We had the skills, like now, if a black man made as much, or if a black woman make as much, or if a woman, period, make as much as a man, they won't do it. They just won't let it do it. It somewhere is a double standard. Somewhere for us is maybe double. But we made, you know, we made progress in so much field in air, in space, and.
In the thyroid gland, the TSH binds to receptors within the gland, thereby secreting the thyroid hormones triiodothyronine or T3 and thyroxine or T4. Thus, thyroid hormones contribute to 1. The growth and development of the body's tissue. 2. Creates a balance between the catabolic and anabolic reactions of the body. Increased T3 and T4 levels in the blood results in the hormones binding to receptors in the hypothalamus, thereby blocking the release of TRH or inhibiting the responsiveness of the anterior pituitary to TRH, thus creating a negative feedback which inhibits the rising levels of the thyroid hormones in the blood.
In setting yourself emotionally for
well,
those two tasks?
I'm a person also in the songs. In the 5 songs of Rückert, first of all, it's very varied. I sing about a transcendental experience, waking up in the middle of the night and discovering the calm of understanding that there is someone else that is in charge of the universe, and that even in the calm of the night, there is someone that is in charge, and that is a calming effect on the singer. I also sing about love and why I would like to be loved, not because of beauty, but because of myself. These are very philosophical things in a way. And then I think one of the greatest songs that I know of any song, Ich bin der Welt abhanden gekommen, to actually sing that I am far away from the world and I live alone in my music and in my song.
I think I'm probably at my time capacity. I just want to share a couple images of plants and tinctures, since that's a part of my dream exploration practice, and more about the Dream Support Hotline, which I've been thinking about for years, since starting in 2015 with a co-facilitator to work to share herbalism workshops that are rooted in remembering dreams, dream interpretation, herbs in order to remember dreams, but also herbs and somatic practices to interrogate, internalize internalized racism, internalized belief systems that are a product of like structures of oppression. And many of the people in the workshop that my co-facilitator and I led were people of color who had relationships with negative stigmas around alternative health and wellness practices. And so this dream hotline was something that I'd been wanting to do while teaching these workshops, and also grew up interpreting dreams. And it's just a central part of my herbalism practice. And when we went into quarantine and lockdown during the pandemic, I noticed a spike in what was happening in my dreams in terms of just processing the waking trauma we were all going through, and fears. And I noticed, because I was still teaching workshops during this time, that there was just a lot for people to process, and a lot that people were and are continuing to process through the dream space during this time. And it felt important to open up a space where Black people throughout the Black diaspora could have the safety of talking about their dreams and remembering their dreams through vocalizing, like remembering the self through vocalizing, and having another Black person to interpret the dreams. And so that is currently what I'm working on. And I want to play a little bit before I end. And the hotline is open for Black people to call in. It is an ongoing project. And I'm going to share some sound from that if there's time. Also wanted to end with water, but there isn't enough time for this entire video, and it can be seen on the Visualizing Care website. Of the Dream Support Hotline on Movement Radio. How have your dreams been in the last week? And how did your dream world wrap up in 2021? For me, a lot of my dreams at the end of 2021 were about organizing. They actually felt a bit anxiety driven and about clutter. They were also about order and felt somewhat frantic. And my dreams in this first week of 2022 have been very much about traveling to spaces that appear to be new, but that have deep ancestral familiarity. Just something about these spaces feel like I've been there many, many, many times before. And when I wake up, I only remember maybe a few scenes, and the memories of the dreams are less about being tied to a vivid imagery and more about being tied to a bodily sensation and memories of flashes of particular colors. And some of the colors I'm thinking about that are popping in right now are like pink and yellow. And so, I wonder what dream themes are showing up in your dreams currently. Today, we're gonna explore 3 dream messages left on the Dream Support Hotline. And these dreams that we're gonna get into today feel connected to one another through themes of water, protection, connection with wildlife, connection with domesticated animals or animals with a history of domestication, human domestication, and themes of creating new worlds. So I just want to thank everyone who called in with dreams, and I thank everyone who's listening. And I hope that these interpretations are helpful. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started.
I looked at my phone later last night. I had a dream last night that I looked out my window and I could see a large teal, black, and red hummingbird.
Okay, so that was just a teaser of the last episode. I've gone over on time, so I want to be respectful of this space. But thank you so much for being present and with my sharing. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Charmaine. That was fantastic and really interesting, creative breadth. So I want to introduce our two colleagues who are going to help lead discussion. They're going to kind of kick us off. Please feel free to put questions in the chat or just to raise your hand. And they're going to sort of help facilitate that and offer some reflections of their own. Jules Oldenhall James is a theater director and a dramaturg, and she produces work that connects our complicated present with the historical past and the imagined future. At Duke, she's a lecturer in the theater studies department. She serves as the director of academic engagement for the Arts and Humanities program, helping undergraduates navigate curricular and co-curricular interests. And she co-directs Story Plus, a summer qualitative research program. A member of Duke's Disability Access Initiative and the Health Humanities Lab, her research focuses on collaborations between scientists and artists to interrogate, represent, and transform the impacts of pressing communal concerns such as climate change, mortality, and the role of technology in everyday life. The other colleague joining us today is Denise Weaver. Denise serves as the Associate Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and the Director of Clinical Operations with the Duke University Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, where she leads training programs for staff, students, and patients. She has over 15 years of experience developing initiatives that better serve diverse populations and has emerged as a leader in spearheading initiatives to serve underrepresented clients. Before joining Duke, Denise oversaw 2 mental health treatment programs that served largely Black and Latinx clients in New York City. And in addition to her master's in education of science with a focus on rehabilitation counseling, Denise maintains a credential as a certified rehabilitation counselor and received an award from New York State as a certified rehabilitation counselor of the year in 2014. Since joining Duke, Denise has participated in just last year, is that right, 2 years ago? Denise has 2 years has participated in joining in various forms, including town hall events for Duke University School of Medicine, and serves as the vice chair of ME Squared, Motivate, Mentor, Educate, and Empower, an employee resource group for Black staff. She pursues the most current research and training on racial equity, bias, and inclusion among the most marginalized, underserved populations, and is passionate about improving diversity among staff, faculty, and learners, and providing pathways to success for Black communities at Duke. In recognition of this work, Denise has been honored this year with the Samuel Du Bois Cook Society Award, which honors colleagues whose work recognizes, celebrates, and affirms the presence of African-American students, faculty, and staff at Duke University. So thanks to you both for helping us lead off this discussion. And again, for people in the audience, please feel free to jump in with questions, either in the chat or just raise your hand. All right, over to you all.
Thank you. Totally. I'll just begin a quick visual description of myself. This is Jules speaking. I am a white woman with a round face and chemically assisted red hair, bright blue glasses. I'm wearing a black sweater and sitting in my office amongst my books and tchotchkes. As Julie had mentioned earlier, I'm at Duke proper, which is on unceded land of the Shakori and Catawba peoples. And I'm really thrilled to be here today. I come to this work as a space. It's sort of an interesting space as we talk about sort of what brings us here. I'm a place that's most visible and invisible in care work, is that my journey to this became as a caregiver, which means I get a lot of sort of representational space. And yet the work of caregiving is also sort of hyper invisibilized in the way that it's structured, the way that it's remunerated, the way that it's even understood by those of us that do it. So I consider myself someone who's coming to disability studies as kind of patient adjacent. And in that, thinking about what are my privileges and limits of my ability to speak in representation, but also in deep humility for the need for different vocabularies, not new vocabularies, but different vocabularies to understand lived experience and embodiment. And I think art, certainly the art that I try to make or collaborate on, and the art that we see in the exhibit and that Kim and Charmaine have represented, given us today to talk about, is helping us defamiliarize and think about the wider sensory world of embodiment, not just the visual, but how powerful the visual is for point of view and perspective, and drawing in how we might understand coming from what we encounter with those different vocabularies, how we must engage and also understand the limits of our engagement, but still sort of sit with and be next to in terms of our understanding. So thanks for letting me sit here and enjoy all this good food for thought.
Thank you, Jules. Thank you so much, everyone. It's really such an honor to be with you all this afternoon. So I'm Denise Weaver. I am coming into the Zoom room with a blue background, and I am wearing a salmon colored collared shirt. I particularly picked this shirt out because I was going to be with you all today, and I opted to not wear my traditional white or black shirt. I'm giving you all some additional color this afternoon. But I thank you so much for the introduction. I am just super excited to be here. As Jolie mentioned, I am nested in the Department of Psychiatry at Duke, and I am one of the leaders and active participants in the space of anti-racism that certainly has a different feel at Duke in 2022. And I have a number of ideas that I'm hoping to share with you all today. But I am just, again, like very excited to be in the Zoom room with you all, because what we saw today was certainly eye-opening in many ways. So I'm looking forward to our discussion with you all. And thank you, artists, for being here with us and sharing so much so far. So really looking forward to engaging you all.
Maybe I can just kick it off with one question that I'd love to put to the four of you, which is, one of the central issues for this project, but also for feminism in general around this question has been the issue of visibility. And one of the reasons that we wanted to think about this question with you all was this issue of how abilities and varied abilities, disabilities, various forms of ability do or don't show up. In other words, what it means to think about disabilities. And I think that this also shows up in the social space with things like microaggressions, right? The things that maybe aren't fully visible to us all, but that deeply change the way that we experience care in the world. And I guess I'd love to hear, obviously part of what we were thinking of was the artists would let us see this differently. And I think we've definitely seen that here. And so I'd love to hear you all talk a bit about how that question about visibility and invisibility maybe changes the way that you think about care. I also have questions for Charmaine about Brazil, but that's another question.
Yeah, thank you. I could start us off. I realized that I missed a few identifiers as I introduced myself. I'm also a Black woman who uses she, her pronouns. I am a native New Yorker. So Charmaine, I heard the Brooklyn dialogue, very excited about that. Born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. If you didn't know, now you know. But yeah, and I have some earrings in my ear, and I also have locks that, you know, need to get done. But that's where I'm at. I see you, Charmaine, right? Okay, right. Okay, so I wanted to respond to that, Jolie, in terms of visibility. You know, I think that, you know, like and I think it could be incredibly personal how someone elects to, one, exercise their own visibility. You know, in many spaces that I operate in, especially in the School of Medicine, visibility isn't always easily viewed from the participant, from the staff, from the faculty, and then the trainee view. I think that, you know, I think it's really important to name how much privilege comes with visibility, because in current times it seems very, it's almost more comfortable for many individuals to ignore the visibility of so many. And that's why the work that I do personally is incredibly impactful, I believe, because I really want to do everything I can to speak for those that are not, don't necessarily have a voice, and or let alone, you know, the ability to be seen. And so, yeah, I would imagine we can definitely speak about some of those other themes, especially when you think about the work that we saw today.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I have, my disabilities are invisible, although one day I anticipate that they won't be. And I'm also a queer femme, so I find myself in between worlds, in terms of gay, straight, able, disabled, and also like movement, stasis. Like, I don't know, I also see that a lot of like different parts of me in conflict with one another about these types of different places that I embody. And so there's an essay by Susan Wendell where she kind of argues that there's such a thing as like being healthily disabled and unhealthily disabled. And I push back a little bit at that idea. I mean, she was saying like, you can be disabled and be really healthy, you know, like you can use a wheelchair or, you know, have a visible disability and not be sick. And then you can also be disabled and sick. And she kind of uses the word like unhealthily disabled to distinguish the two. And I thought the language was very useful for me. I mean, I like reading Susan Wendell, and I think that the essay was really important. And I also pushed back a little on it because although I have invisible disabilities, I do not think of myself as unhealthy. And yeah, I think that there's a lot of like charged language there about like what is health and like what does it mean to be unhealthy or healthy, and like kind of like a label there that I don't necessarily align with. But yeah, thanks. Yeah.
I mean, sorry, Jules, jump in.
I was just going to say, it reminds me, I was so struck in Charmaine's video that we saw between the digital kind of biomedical anatomical journey of the cell and the body's condition, and the notion that how medicine makes it legible and illegible certain spaces of how we understand our bodies, and what kind of authority we've given that language, and how what I think a number of disabled artists or artists who are navigating that are taking that defamiliarization and shifting it into another level, or giving it a different set of languages, visual languages, oral, sonic languages, physical dimension languages, to kind of reclaim what counts as legibility, what that notion of invisible and visible is something that's often layered onto by medicine, so that it can make a kind of hierarchy, which is not usually what's the experience. The experience is very integrated. I think that even though, so we look at how much medicine uses visuality, uses visual technologies, and uses a particular kind of vocabulary to both train the people who are treating to see past what is the apparent and into the real thing. And yet that kind of dissection or bifurcation between the person who's sort of fully embodied in front of you, which has lots of histories and ways of articulating their condition, and how you are telling them their condition is articulated, that kind of conflicts is so, I think just in that little video snippet, we get a kind of full representation of that situated in other lived experiences and other ways of knowing, that again, in trying to encourage medical students or people who are bound for medicine to develop these vocabularies, not just until they get to the clinic and have to engage with people, but that's part of their learning process of assessing the world, so they can also ask productive questions of technology and the way that medicine and authority and biomedicine teaches them how the body is and works and is understood.
We have a question from the audience. Rachel, do you want to jump in and ask your question?
Can I say one thing about?
Oh, sorry.
Because there's just I was thinking what comes up for me when you bring up, when we talk about visibility and invisibility, is like as hypervisibility, and like when new language, or when people are like grappling with new language about like a particular subjectivity, how that creates, especially if someone is isolated in a space. Like, for instance, I was one of the few Black people in my cohort in grad school. And so there was all eyes on us, like this hyper visibility. And I, like with the series of videos, like there was Jesse Norman in the thyroid hormone video. And I have another one with Jesse Norman and the opera singer. And something that I like to think about is how hypervisibility impacts our organs, or how like all eyes on a person, all eyes on a subjectivity that someone may be like grappling with or learning how to like wrap their heads around, like how that sort of eyes on like can cause a potential stress, or like a pivot in like the inner world of like the person receiving that visibility, when they may actually want rest or space away from visibility in moment, or like where does autonomy become present in like the conversation around visibility? It's what that makes me think of. So.
Yeah, great. I want to circle back to all those questions. So Rachel, jump in, please.
Yeah, thanks everyone for your thoughts and everything you've been sharing so far. It's really nice to, just like see things, because it's all these different visuals that you're both showing, and it's been great. I guess I've been thinking quite a lot about being sick in ways that didn't have to happen, like politically didn't have to happen. So for example, I currently have symptoms of long COVID that are a result of the UK's government's terrible policies around COVID, right? Like this didn't have to happen. And I also have had endometriosis for a long time, which if you kind of look at, inflammatory disease, and I've been reading
Inflamed. It's a book about deep medicine, and it's very interesting looking at like how inflammation in the US especially, but in kind of the whole world really, has been increasing like the disease burden, and it links it back to like sector colonialism and extractivism and all these kinds of things, and sort of argues that a lot of these diseases track back basically to that, and that's been really interesting. But basically, I guess my question is, like, one thing that is challenging is that in disability studies you have the social model of disability and you have disability justice that both kind of reclaim disability in the disabled body as like a new way of producing knowledge, and like kind of gives a lot of power to that. And I've like taken so much from that and learned so much from that, but also I'm very pissed off and angry about being sick because it didn't have to happen. And I think when it's politically orientated and like, you know, intergenerational sickness that's passed down because of racism, because of all these structural oppressions, like that kind of, it didn't have to happen, and I'm angry about my sickness and I can't accept it and be proud about it. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that, because yeah, there's people who've engaged a bit like Jasper Pure on debility and things like that, but it's a tension that I often feel is quite difficult, and actually that resistance can be quite painful in of itself and make you sick. So it's kind of like, thoughts please if you have any, and thank you so much anyway.
Does anyone want to take that one on?
I mean, I can start maybe a part of it. Yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, like Susan Wendell and like other people, Alison Kafer, who wrote Feminist Queer Crip, is like, yeah, great reference for this too, kind of like pushing back on the social model even of disability, and having like what she calls, yeah, like a political model disability. But yeah, like Susan Wendell, like I like quote her a lot because she says, you know, like, as much as I am, you know, like proud of my disability and, you know, I'm a scholar on it, I do not want to become any more disabled than I already am, you know. And she kind of recognizes that, you know, in some ways is kind of ableist, but, you know, it's just her truth. It's just what it is. And yeah, I mean, I definitely relate to that in a lot of ways. It's like, I don't want to get hurt again. And for a long time, I was making the film so that I could stop hurting and so that I could get out of pain and heal. And that was the only reason why I was making films. And then once I realized that that wasn't going to happen, I was kind of like, well, why am I doing this then? Like, why am I even making films anymore? Like, it was a very kind of like 1 + 1 = 2 process. And then once I realized that it actually equaled like 12, I was like not on board anymore. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's a sense of lack of control about all of this, which I was hearing like as you were speaking, where it's like, yeah, we don't have control right now over how people are behaving with COVID. And yeah, it's kind of like, what can I do in my world to maintain a sense of control over my health? And that's really hard when chronic illness is unpredictable and really unruly. So yeah, I mean, like for me, it comes back to like, what does it mean to care for yourself? And for me, that has to do with setting boundaries. But that is also really difficult for me as like trauma survivor and a whole bunch of other shit. Sorry. So yeah, that's maybe, I don't have any clear answers. I hear you and the struggle.
Yeah, I second that. Thank you for the comments, Kim, and thank you for posing this tough question for us. It's almost like, yeah, this bad thing happened. It could have been prevented. I'm living with it and it stinks. I mean, that's essentially where I was moved, but I just want to acknowledge that you are here, and I'm glad that you're here. You made it to this space with us today, and you made it you woke up. I mean, if you may even had a dream, I'm not sure, but if you dreamt, there's certainly some hope with that. And I just want to acknowledge that there are, to just like piggyback on Kim's statement around like recognizing the things that we have control over and the things that we don't. I think don't ever lose. I would encourage you to not lose sight of the power that you do have. And even with the things that have happened, that, like you said, could have been avoided. There's a lot of other things that I'm sure are happening, even in that same vein. Feel like I could take this conversation with you offline with some other like recommendations and suggestions, but I would definitely just recognize that you are here, and you are thriving, even if it feels like you're not. But again, thanks for sharing. And lastly, I just, as you were saying that, I was thinking about the lifesaver clip early on. I think that like Kim's piece, the video, I literally, as you were talking, I just was visualizing that scene, like being in the sink and the water just sort of getting high, but not too high, like we're okay. It literally made me think of that, like, and we're there in there with you.
Thank you so much. That was really kind.
Yeah, I feel I want to jump in and affirm as well. And what Kim mentioned, or the question Kim posed about like, how can I best care for myself? I think, I paraphrase, resonates around like this anger around, for me, when I'm dealing with the anger around this could have been avoided. We're in this political historical mess now, and my body is left to carry that weight. Like, what am I to do with this? And I am still processing what to do with that. And so I just want to name that, like, you are not alone in that processing. And like also what I've been trying and like lately in terms of creating structures of support is like, who can I be with to use my anger as a map? Like who in my like surrounding community, like I can talk to that allows that anger and rage, where it's not like a rush to healing or a rush to being okay, but like those structured spaces where like it can be delved into and looked at. Like anger as a map has been something that I've been thinking about, whether that's a person or whether that's like a natural, like a body of water space or something like that, about like sitting with the anger, not to allow it to eat at you, but like to sit with it, to actually to be with it and not rush past it. It's been something I've been working with.
Yeah, thanks. I got really excited, like as you were talking, like I just, yeah, to think about anger, like I was like picturing these little plot points like around as anger, and it also made me think too, like I think lately what I've been realizing about my anger towards other people around COVID, or yeah, like somebody in the comment, yeah, Catherine mentioned the university. Yeah, like I've been realizing that my anger is a shield for terror. Like, yeah, like I'm just terrified, and I haven't been sick yet with COVID, but I am terrified of what would happen to me, with, I don't know what would happen based on the things I'm already dealing with. And so it's like my anger comes up, but it's actually because I am terrified of what's the vulnerability of what's underneath. And so, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about what my anger is, how it's serving me and how it's protecting me too.
I think I'm going to jump in really quick, but yeah, for me, as someone who has, multiple autoimmune diseases and disabilities that I've been able to kind of hide behind up until 2020, it's been a really interesting thing for me to deal with. I could always function in the world as if I didn't have multiple disabilities. And then all of a sudden I had to set so many boundaries with people around me because there was this thing that I had to protect myself from, not knowing what would happen to me if I were to get COVID, and having to set boundaries with work, and having to have the people around you kind of protect you at the level that a lot of the world isn't. It's been a really interesting thing to deal with, and anger has been one of the core emotions for me over the past couple of years, and just hearing you talk about it is really validating.
Yeah, I also want to jump in because I would say that anger was actually what made me want to curate this event in the first place. And that's coming out of, being a breast cancer survivor. It's like, I hate that word survivor. And yet I'm starting to get a little angry around like almost this co-optation of the word survivorship, where people who otherwise have been really, living relatively comfortable lives are talking about surviving quarantine, right? And I'm just kind of like, I want to smack them around a bit. But like, also at the same time, I think that, there's something to be said for like finding community in this sort of like shared anger, shared grief, and shared experiences. In that, like, in a lot of ways, I feel like what COVID did to, at least for those of us who are living with chronic illness or pain or invisible disabilities, is I feel like it kind of made us doubly invisible. And one of the things that I've really been thinking about is like, COVID has also brought up these conversations of mutual aid and like what we can be doing for each other. And where I see mutual aid falling short, particularly within the communities that I've been living in these last couple of years, is that it seems to only be addressing the material needs, as opposed to actually going further and deeper and thinking more about like, how can we support each other psychologically, mentally, emotionally as well. And I think that's actually one of the things that I would like to kind of redefine mutual aid in a way of just like kind of, creating like, I guess what it is like what I wanted to do here was think about with particularly these two artists was like, how have we been surviving all this time, and like who are our networks of support and care, and then trying to figure out really like what works and how that can be something that maybe goes forth and into the world a little bit more as like, as we all live here, like maybe we all or as we're all here in this Zoom room together, like we can also just like step out and in a way feel like there's a community that's been formed here as well. And whether it's impermanent or not, I think there is something impactful and powerful in being able to just like speak up about how fucked up this all is and how angry we all are. I mean, long COVID didn't have to happen, but breast cancer didn't have to happen, or a trauma didn't have to happen, or, I mean, like all of us have been just dealt these fucked up cards in a lot of different ways, and I think that there's parallels as well in terms of like how we're trying to figure out how to survive it all. I think I'm on a tangent, but.
I think there's also spaces where communities of artists, particularly who are, artists who are navigating lots of precarity in lots of all ways, trying to help people think through how that kind of precarity meets public health questions. The University of Florida, which is again, sort of institutional responses, but it's sort of like the institutions provide the structure to then distribute these things that I think people in more mutual aid or more individual networks are making for themselves. So how to get that word out. This is just one sort of space that I've found that where, really the desire was to reach out to those who were most precarious for expertise, right? To not necessarily to the institutions or to the places where I think Felicity said it, or people who were already settled and said, well, how are you doing? Is more to spaces on the margin or, that have navigated systems that do not see them, do not respond to them, and how are they pushing forward or noticing things differently, and how can we center that in the conversation as opposed to a wellness space that says, come, let's get you here, right? Because this is where the kind of settled understanding is. And I mean, I think that there's been a limited awareness, like there's a lot of lip service paid to inclusivity, but that's the real inclusivity, is decentering and moving to something that requires a kind of radical repositioning of what's being done and for whom and by who is the expert. And it's both shown us how difficult, I think, people knew it, but the kind of institutionalized limits of really shifting away from a kind of dominant point of view are every day, right? Sort of staring you in the face, from big decisions to very small decisions. And I think it certainly productively angering. And then also, how does that not become debilitating? As another thing that someone said something about the kind of body burden, right? Or the weight that then sort of resides. How do you not take that into a point that it itself becomes a space, or nurture a space of care to where you can have that anger, but it's not consuming.
I just want to follow up on a couple of the threads here. Because one of the things that has come out of care studies and disability studies both is to show the ways that none of us we all at some point are disabled and at some point are needing care over the course of our lifetimes. And what it means to think about, Jules, when you mentioned this word wellness, I feel like it's like a trigger word for us at this point, of like all of the wellness, regimes or whatever, which are mostly built on a kind of individualist sense of like, you are solely responsible for your own wellness, rather than seeing it as, I think in the way the disability studies and care studies do, a question of deep interrelationality, right? That I think that all of these points, including Rachel's question of like, none of these needs for care come outside of social and structural relationships. And so I think it's one of the things that I think has been really interesting here is to think about how we start to see those needs more. How would it change things if we went through the world understanding that everybody around us at some point is differently abled and in need of care? And I want to recognize what Felicity is saying, that I don't want to create a kind of equivalence among different kinds of, but that we all go in and out of these kinds of needs in different ways. I wanted to come back to something that Jules said earlier about the ways that that this is all kind of indexed through the problem and the question of indexing things through the visual. And I guess the neck of the woods that I come from thinks about this through the question of decoloniality and the categories that we tend to work with. And in other words, the category, for example, of abled and disabled, or needing or not needing, or even all of the social categories that we think with. And I don't know, I guess I would be interested to hear any of the panelists talk about how they think about those categories. Are they helping us? Are they hurting us? Or what should we, because they keep coming back to us. And I guess I'd be curious here, like, what you all think we should do with them. Any kind of open reflections on that?
Wait, can you
the
say
question
what
makes
the
sense.
question is again?
Yeah.
What's that? Like so one of the things we've been thinking about, this question of the visual, and Jules had said earlier, one of the things that we think about, particularly when we think about biomedicine, is that so much of biomedicine is the visual recognition of who needs care. And I think we see this really, like, all of the testing regimes, like who shows up as, I mean, I'm sure we've all been through the experience where, like, you go to all of these clinical settings and they come back with a kind of shruggy emoji of like, we don't see your need for care. And so there's that problem of like the kind of visibility of what the need for care is. And in my brain, and it may just be like, we all kind of come from the place that whatever we're reading and thinking about at a moment. So this is me. But that it has to do with the way we think about categories. In other words, that we have these received categories of what care looks like, of who looks like they need care, of who's the kind of social positioning and how we understand. I mean, I think that we see this a lot in terms of the conversations about social determinants of health and racism within medical and clinical settings, and that like people see and a long history about studies of hysteria and things like that, right? That people see the need for care differently. And I'm just wondering, because on the one hand, I don't think that we want to discard these categories wholesale, right? We want to insist that people see that, for example, when there is racism within clinical practices, that those need to be addressed. And then what that means in terms of how we work with those categories, or I don't know, this is a sort of open question. I maybe one other way to put it is, I remember Barbara Fields, who's a really famous historian who has written a lot about race, and she talks about like going to clinical settings, and on the one hand, just wanting them to like see the clinical outside of questions of race, and on the other hand, saying like, but you have to see this within all of this long history of the ways that these social practice, like the social conditions, have shaped experiences. So I'm not sure if this question is making any more sense now than the first time I tried to frame it, but it's something to do with visibility and categories, if that helps at all.
Billy, can I just try it? Because I was thinking recently there was a Twitter thread from a person who was attempting to be helpful and sort of saying to people, well, here's what you need to do when you show up in a waiting room and you're sick. And without identifying themselves, this is Jules speaking, sorry, without identifying themselves as a white woman, they went through an entire sort of practice of performing sickness that was very much seated in their gender and their racial presentation. And Tressie McMillan Cotton, who is a sociologist at UNC, picked this thread up and said, no, that doesn't work as a Black woman. I have showed up, and I only show up in a clinical setting, even if I'm dressed to the nines, and I'm always dressed if I use my honorific as a professor. And these strategies are already magnifying the disparities that we sit in when we enter this clinical space. And this is meant to be helpful, but I'm offering you offering the kind of very complex counter narrative, which she's written about in her book Thick, that for Black women, that doesn't even matter, even when, sort of knowing the codes and knowing how to show up. You will never ascend to the place where your presence is going to be read in particular kinds of ways. And I think, I don't have an answer per se, except sort of troubling discourse that I hear sometimes from health disparities. Instead of illuminating the economic and kind of socially structured systems, is more about, well, we always thought X group of people were unhealthy or at risk, and they are, and it's more magnifying that difference as opposed to really pulling us up to say, how did those differences get started, right? And what are we doing to eradicate that sort of movement of it? It more sort of reifies identity. At the same time, it seems to say, we see it now. And so I think that there's that tension has existed a long time, but is now being articulated as medicine tries to sort of say, yes, we're on it. But the way that's being on it is I think still a little certainly dissatisfying, maybe at the patient, certainly at the patient level.
We have one more
Rini,
question.
did you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for doing this. Hi, Felicity. Hi, Lauren. And thank you to the artists who presented their work. I think just to kind of, I have like a million things in my head right now, but since Jocelyn, you brought up the categories, I think that in a kind of an ideal world, perhaps we would have a sort of system, like a medical system, where each individual would be looked at in terms of their own sort of case study, right? But unfortunately, categories have been drawn throughout history that put people in those categories. So like if a Black woman comes in and complains about something, she is much less likely to be believed about her pain or her condition, etc. And I mean, I feel like I think about some of these things that we've been talking about kind of in terms of intersectionality. And that we are all this kind of grid of numerous categories, right, that have been drawn throughout society. And as someone who is a mixed woman, who I'm half Asian, half Latina, I grew up with my Latino father and not my Asian mother, but I'm often looked at as an Asian person, and that doesn't actually give much insight into my actual lived experience of being raised by a single Latino father who, you know, we didn't even have health insurance when we were growing up and hardly ever saw a doctor. And at one point when I had this basically a growth coming out of my neck in 7th grade and I couldn't go to school for 3 months, my father actually just used his own sort of like, I mean, whatever has been passed down to him, he's a farmer, what his knowledge of nature is to try to heal me. And I'm lucky to have had that. Of course, later the problem presented itself when I was in my 20s and I finally had health insurance. And so I went and actually got an MRI because I had a job. And I got an MRI and it was diagnosed as what that thing was. And it was a brachial cleft cyst, which is extremely rare, that got infected. And it was basically coming back. And they told me that, yes, you can go and get healed in the same way that you did before by not, you know, going on a macrobiotic diet for 3 months and, you know, being literally sick for 3 months, or you could have surgery and have this pulled out because you'll never, this may come back again. And it's interesting because I think that those, I think both of those forms of healing were valid, but it's interesting that I got to experience 2 ways of doing that. Just because of the body of knowledge that my dad has, but also because of what he couldn't provide in terms of financial assets in order for me to actually go and have an MRI when I was younger in 7th grade. Sorry, I don't even know where I'm going with this anymore, but I was trying to kind of make a comment about kind of all of those ways that you are seen and all of those ways that sometimes, and I think Charmaine, I kind of wanted to just maybe mirror what you were saying about the ways that you are seen are oftentimes not helpful to a diagnosis or to healing or to help. And then likewise, all of the ways that everything that is going on in your body that is completely invisible is, like I put in the chat, is this like tiresome. I mean, I have found that I've had a kind of a series of illnesses in the past couple of months that have made me just kind of retract from society in a lot of ways. And so that's why I'm actually really grateful for these kinds of spaces. And just sorry, I know I'm going on and on, but one thing I wanted to say, like, I didn't get to read the entire link that got sent, but about Anise, your job as a psychologist, I believe.
I'm in psychiatry, not quite a psychologist, but I work in psychiatry.
Okay, because I worked recently at a very elite liberal arts college where I was teaching, and all of this in a department where I was the only person of color teaching, and therefore all of the students of color came to me to talk about their experiences in this very white institution. And of course, they frequented the the mental health clinic, but told me that there were no mental health practitioners of color. And this has been going on for years in this institution. And this institution has tons and tons of money, an endowment, and literally just won't. And they say, oh, we can't get any people of color to work down here because it's a small town. They just aren't throwing enough money at it, essentially, you know, and that's something that just angers me a lot. Sorry, I'm just going to leave it there. It's very kind of a constellation of a bunch of rants, but thank you for having this.
Oh, what
Yeah.
you shared reminds me of this essay that my friend recommended by this artist and writer, Carolyn Lazard. I'm gonna send the link. It's called The World is Unknown. It's on Triple Canopy. And this, Carolyn talks a lot of, like, kind of addresses some of what you were bringing up around, like, their experience with having autoimmune and things coming up in their body and their interaction with biomedicine and growing up with parents who were, I think, Haitian Seventh-day Adventist naturopaths. And yeah, like this, they explore those worlds and how they intersect and like resistance and how they push against each other. And it might be interesting for you to look into if you haven't already. And I sent the link in the chat.
Yeah, Caroline is actually having a talk at the Walker on February 12th. So I will put a link in the chat on that.
Super.
Thank you.
I want to thank everyone for coming. I realize we're over time and I don't want to abuse people's time. This has been a really fantastic discussion. I realize we could go on all day long. I would urge you to go visit the exhibit that Felicity has curated. And Lauren, maybe you can drop the link one more time in the chat so people can see it. And this has been a really, really fantastic conversation. Again, if you kind of got here by accident and you want to get on our mailing list for other events, please drop your email in the chat and we'll add you to the list. And thank you so much to our panelists, particularly these wonderful artists. And I'm sorry that Kim had to step off, but also to Jules and Denise for your insights. And I hope that I will see you all soon